The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office announced that it has completed both Wells' autopsy and toxicology report, but those results are going to stay sealed until the grand jury gets the case. And while the medical findings are off limits, we know Wells' family is doing everything they can to get other information. Nolan's mother, for example, subpoenaed Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, Life360, seeking his messages, photos, GPS data as she pushes for answers as to what happened to her son. What are they going to learn? I want to ask digital forensics analyst Morgan Wright to talk about this. Morgan, good to see you. I have a lot of questions. So first of all, if they get all these records, okay, assuming that the companies don't put up a legal fight, if they get everything they're looking for, best case scenario, what is that going to tell them about what happened to Nolan?
That's a good question, Jesse. The thing I would do is I would take all of that information, I would map it against the GPS we have from the boat, when it left, when it slowed down, when it sped back up, map that with the call, and then map all of the digital media and the time and date stamps and location to that. So you can kind of create like a kaleidoscope, just a compendium of things that show you the timeline. When were pictures taken? What kind of data is there? Was he seen on the island? Was he not? Was he seen on the boat? So, we don't know what we know until they get this information, but I would start with the timeline. I would map the call against the GPS location and then map the social media when you get it to that.
Will they know if information has been deleted from any of the apps from the phone and when it was deleted? Because if they can create a timeline, if he was no longer on the boat and he was on Horn Island, would they be able to know what was deleted and when it was deleted?
Yeah, there's a couple companies out there. One that a lot of people have heard about, Celebrite. They do do a lot of great work on digital forensics, extraction. So yeah, if as long as it hasn't been tampered with or people haven't gotten in there looking around, that's part of the problem, right? Anytime you go in there, you start changing the footprint of what that device was. You want it in the pristine state, but Celebrite could still an extraction like that could tell you what was there. And most of the time, depending on the operating system, who logged in and how, could tell you what was deleted, when it was deleted. That would give you some ideas if it was deleted. I'm not saying it was, but if it was, a Celebrite report could give you a lot of good facts.
There was news that came out that the family has also issued preservation notices to the family members of Nolan's friends, and I believe investigative agencies as well. My legal point of view, you're putting the pieces in place for a potential lawsuit. I've always wondered, if you go through the lawsuit route, you go through discovery, can they get answers that they may not get through the criminal investigation, the legal investigation, the law enforcement investigation? What kind of data could they get there, and how would that help them in their search for answers?
Well, look, first of all, the preservation notice, when I was a detective, we did the same thing too. It just says don't delete the records, don't do anything. Spoilage is indication of guilt. I mean, that can be inferred in a court. So I think so far the families are all cooperating from what the record shows. So, and then what you would look at is look for communications, look for text messages, look for anything that shows contemporaneous texts or communications that might be tied with the disappearance of Nolan, when he disappeared, or was he seen? Did anybody say, I saw him? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can get. But when you do that, that's a civil suit, right? So you can get a lot of information in discovery in a civil suit, but the grand jury can get a lot more information because they have full subpoena power, including the toxicology, including the autopsy.
By the way, I love that our digital guy here almost froze. I mean, it seems almost ironic, but we're good. We got you, Morgan. I want to play you something. This was a big piece of news this week. So Nolan Wells' family hired an audio engineer.
State autopsy complete in the Nolan Wells case. No official phone search results. A new audio expert speaks, and new evidence just emerged. If any time you want to prosecute somebody for a crime, especially homicide, you start with the cause of death. Because homicide or any type of murder charge is going to be that one person caused the death of another person. So the first thing that you have to establish is that the death was caused. If a death is accidental, that doesn't mean that there's no criminal responsibility. It could be manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide, but you have to start with what went wrong and what happened. And unless or until we know the answers to that, we're really sort of multiplying zeros, if you will. So much of the complications in this case are that it is really a blank canvas. We have so many more questions than we do have answers here. And so there's a tendency for people to sort of fill in the gaps with their own sort of pre-existing worldviews, opinions, and things like that. So we start once we get the autopsy. At a minimum, I don't know that we'll establish anything, but hopefully we can eliminate at least certain causes of death, and then maybe start to sort of move this forward. Whether it turns into a criminal investigation, whether or not, hopefully at least, it provides some answers for everybody, especially the family. Sit with that for a second. 3 weeks ago, a mother compared 2 apps on her son's phone. Life 360 said one thing, Snapchat said another. The locations didn't match. That's not a rumor. That's not speculation. Christine used Life 360 to track Nolan's phone and compared the location history between Snapchat and the tracking app, but found that the data didn't match. Now hold that thought, because we're about to layer on top of it a state autopsy that's finished, sealed, and going nowhere near the public until a grand jury sees it first. We're about to layer on an audio recording so contested that 2 different forensic experts can't even agree on whether the file being played on television is the same file that was originally released. And we're about to layer on a search of a dead teenager's phone that, as of this recording, still has not produced a single official public result. This is not a video about whether Nolan Wells drowned. This is a video about what happens when the physical evidence runs out and all that's left is data. Phones, metadata, audio waveforms, login histories. This is the story of a death investigation that is quietly turned into a digital forensics case. And whether a jury ever sees it that way remains to be seen. Let's start with the piece everyone's been waiting on, the state autopsy. According to multiple outlets, the state autopsy of Nolan Wells has been completed, but the results are not yet public. The results are expected to be sealed until the autopsy is presented to a grand jury, which will determine whether a crime occurred. Read that again. The document exists right now today. Somebody in Mississippi has read it, and you have not. Here's what the Jackson County District Attorney's Office has said about that grand jury process. And I want to be fair to them here because this part matters. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has previously said it will present the case to a grand jury once the local sheriff's department investigation into Wells's death is complete. And they've been clear about what that does and doesn't mean. The DA's office said convening a grand jury does not mean there is any criminality and is standard procedure for most unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. As District Attorney for the 19th Circuit Court District of Mississippi, I want to talk directly to the people of Jackson County. Our community is grieving the tremendous loss of Nolan Wells, who is loved and treasured by everyone. Nolan's family deserves answers, and our community deserves answers. Every death in the county except those of natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks are presented to your grand jury. So officially, procedurally, this is standard. But nothing about this case has felt standard to the people living inside it. Now, before we go further, quick channel note. If you're new here, this is where we go past the headlines and into the actual documents, the subpoenas, the affidavit, the expert reports. Subscribe if that's what you're looking for. Okay, back to it. Here's the question we're sitting with today. And it's not the question most people online are asking. Most people are asking, did Nolan Wells drown or was he killed? That's the wrong question to be obsessing over right now, because nobody, not the family's pathologist, not the state, not a single expert we've heard from, has enough to answer it yet. Here's the real question, the one the evidence can actually speak to. Why, a month after a body was pulled from the water, are we still waiting on the most basic digital records? A phone download, a data extraction that should have taken days, not weeks. Think about what that means. Because in almost every modern death investigation, the phone is the first thing detectives lock down, not the last. Let's talk about what we actually know about that phone. On July 15th, that's 11 days after Wells disappeared, his family's attorney announced an agreement. Independent investigators and Jackson County Sheriff's investigators would be present when data from Nolan Wells's phone is downloaded, and both sides would review the data at the same time. That sounds like a fair process on paper. 2 sides, 1 download. No chance for either party to control the narrative alone. But here's the friction point. Weeks after that agreement, there is still no public result. Not from the sheriff's office, not from the family's independent team. The family also said the teen's phone, which reportedly was with Nolan's friends, will undergo a joint inspection by investigators and independent experts because Wells's family has suggested the device could have been tampered with. Notice this. That's not a throwaway line. That's the family on the record raising the possibility of tampering before a single official result has come back. And it gets more specific than that. Christine Wells Wansley, Nolan's mother, gave an interview to Good Morning America. In it, she alleged that her family tracked his phone, but when she went to pick it up from Wells's friends, it appeared that some texts and Snapchat messages had been deleted. Deleted messages on a phone belonging to a boy who was already dead. That's the allegation, not a finding, an allegation from the mother in a national broadcast interview. So, what did the family do next? They didn't just wait on the joint phone download, they went around it. On July 28th, court filings show Christine Wells Wansley filed subpoenas against the companies behind Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Life360, Snapchat, and TikTok. 6 platforms, not one. Here's what she's actually asking for. She's seeking current and previous usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, and display names associated with her son's accounts. And beyond that, the subpoenas also request IP addresses linked to login, password resets, and other account activity along with related metadata. That is not a mother asking to see old photos. That is a mother building a digital timeline from 6 different companies because she does not trust the one phone that's already in evidence. Now, I want to be disciplined here because this is where a lot of coverage has gotten sloppy. The subpoenas do not establish that anyone accessed the phone, deleted information, or committed a crime. That's not me saying that to cover myself. That's the legal reality of what a subpoena is. It's a request for records. It is not a finding. So separate the questions here, because this is important. Whether messages were deleted from Nolan Wells's phone is one question. Whether that deletion, if it happened, was done with any intent to hide something is a completely different question. And right now, only the first part of that has even a shred of supporting detail. The second part is pure inference. Nobody official has confirmed it, but here's why. The family isn't just taking the sheriff's word for it. Listen to what one of Wells's friends told reporters, pushing back on the tampering allegation directly. No one even was in contact with his phone until it was moved from the boat to the truck, and none of us have access to Nolan's password to get on his phone and delete anything, the friend said. So, you have the mother saying messages were gone, and you have the friend group saying nobody could have touched it. Those two things cannot both be fully true, and nobody outside that circle can resolve it yet, because the joint phone download that was promised back in mid-July still hasn't produced a public result. That gap from July 15th to today is the friction point of this entire case. Not a missing timeline, a missing download. Now let's talk about why the family didn't wait around for the phone to answer everything on its own. Because in the middle of all this, a 9-minute phone call started spreading online, and it may end up mattering more than the phone itself. Here's what we actually know happened. On the day Wells disappeared, one of the teens who traveled to Horn Island with Nolan Wells called dispatch and reported that their boat was sinking due to a bilge pump issue. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources initially released that audio. For weeks, that call sat there, a dispatch recording, background noise, standard emergency audio. Then an independent audio engineer got hold of it. Her name is Janetta Brantley, and according to reports, she cleaned the recording up, making the background noise in it audible for the first time. And that's when this case changed shape, because once the background noise became audible, people started hearing things in it. At one point, someone allegedly says, "Wyatt, check his chest." Other alleged phrases like, "Wake the fat up," "Nolan and Nolan don't die," are seemingly heard as well. Sit with those words for a second. Not as headlines, as sounds buried under 9 minutes of static and panic and a dispatcher's voice on a call about a sinking boat. And here's the detail that makes this call even harder to sit with. Cito, the company that was called for help, never actually arrived to assist the sinking boat. So a call goes out. 9 minutes of it get recorded, help never shows up. And weeks later, the public is picking through the background noise trying to figure out what it means. Now, here's where this stops being a viral audio clip and starts being a legitimate forensic question. Because there isn't just one version of this recording circulating anymore. There are at least two, and they don't match. TMZ published an enhanced version of the call, and according to that outlet, some people believe they can hear someone asking, "Is he dead?" along with other phrases including Nolan, "check his chest and wake up." That's a different and heavier claim than the version Brantley worked on. So, a digital forensics expert named Robert Frieded went on air to actually test it, not to react to it, to test it. Here's what he found. Comparing the TMZ version to the original file, the TMZ version of the recording is 20 seconds longer than the original, and it has a different digital fingerprint. 20 seconds longer, a different digital fingerprint. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. A digital fingerprint isn't a figure of speech. It's the actual file signature. The data that tells you whether a recording has been altered, re-encoded, or edited since it was first captured. If two versions of the same call don't share one, they are not technically the same file anymore. Fry didn't stop there. He raised a second problem about what got left out. He said much of the original release from Mississippi's Marine Resources Department was redacted, potentially omitting information embedded in the file. In his own words, there's account numbers that were shared. There were phone numbers. All that stuff is different than the original. I want to see the original, and I want to look at the metadata of the original. So, notice this. A trained digital forensics expert is not telling you what the call means. He's telling you he can't verify what the call is yet because the version everyone's been debating on social media isn't confirmed to be the unaltered source file. That is a completely different problem than what did someone say in the background of a 911 style call. That's a chain of custody problem. And chain of custody problems are the kind that get evidence thrown out of a courtroom or get it taken far more seriously once it's verified. So where does that leave us? On the audio right now. Today we have a real recording of a real distress call about a real boat taking on real water. That much isn't in dispute by anyone. What's in dispute is everything underneath it. The background noise, the enhanced versions, whether either enhancement reflects an unaltered original, and whether the phrases people believe they're hearing are actually there at all. One expert has raised concerns about that chain of custody on the record. Investigators haven't confirmed what, if anything, they've done with the original file. That gap between a viral clip and a verified one is still open, and it's about to collide with something else. Because while the public was arguing over waveforms and whether someone said, "Is he dead?" investigators were quietly doing something a lot less dramatic and a lot more procedural. They were going back through the case piece by piece, looking at who around Wells actually cooperated and who didn't. That's next. Remember at the top of this beat I told you a chain of custody problem was about to collide with a witness problem. Here it is. The Jackson County Sheriff has said investigators have interviewed about 60 witnesses. Lead Better said according to the Sun-Herald in Mississippi. And the sheriff said the FBI is helping examine digital evidence collected. 60 witnesses. Not 3, not 5, 60. And out of all of those people, one name keeps surfacing. A man who was on the water that day and who chose a very different path than some of the teenagers involved. According to reporting connected to the family's legal team, this man boarded the malfunctioning boat to help, then briefly towed it a short distance with his own boat. And here's the part that matters. He has since cooperated with law enforcement, provided names of potential witnesses, and allowed authorities to inspect his boat and GPS device. Sit with that contrast for a second. One man, a stranger to this family, hands over his boat, hands over his GPS, gives investigators names. Compare that to the mother's own son's phone, where messages are alleged to be missing and a joint download that still hasn't produced a public result. Notice this. Cooperation isn't evenly distributed in this case. Some people are opening doors. Others, according to the family, are the reason a door needs to be opened by subpoena in the first place. Now, let's go back to that private autopsy, because this is the piece most people online have already stopped paying attention to, and it might be the most important scientific document in the entire case right now. The family commissioned their own independent examination, and here's exactly what it found and didn't find. The independent examination found no skull fractures or major fractures and no deep tissue injuries that clearly explained Wells's death. Read that again slowly. No skull fractures, no major fractures, no deep tissue injuries that clearly explain a cause of death. If you came into this case assuming a violent, obvious injury, the kind of thing a private pathologist would spot immediately, that is not what this report describes, but it's not clean either. The pathologist did flag something. He noted a red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head that he described as inconclusive and deserving of further investigation. Inconclusive, not nothing, not proof. A flag on the record from a licensed pathologist telling the next examiner where to look harder. And here's the caveat. This report itself makes sure you understand. The report stressed that decomposition prevented definitive conclusions about bruising, abrasions, or other possible injuries. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. A body recovered from open water after time in that water does not preserve evidence the way a body found on dry land within hours does. That's not a conspiracy. That's basic forensic biology, and it means this private autopsy, as thorough as it was, landed exactly where the family's own attorney said it would. The private examination concluded that Wells's cause and manner of death remain undetermined pending investigation. Undetermined. That's the official language from the family's own hired expert. Now here's where this gets almost impossible to sit with if you're a parent. When the case moved to the second official state autopsy, the one that just wrapped, there was a detail about what was and wasn't available for examination. The throat was not present at the time of the second autopsy. Read that again. And according to a separate report on the same finding, the physician who performed the independent autopsy is seeking access to Wells's throat for additional examination because that part of the body was not available during the second state-run autopsy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what that means because nobody official has explained it yet. Nobody has said whether that's a routine forensic handling issue, a timing issue between two separate autopsies performed by two separate offices, or something else entirely. What I can tell you is this. It is now a documented on the road gap between what the family's pathologist wanted to examine and what was physically available to examine. Separate the questions again, because that's the discipline this case demands. Whether that absence has an innocent procedural explanation is one question. Whether it gets explained publicly on the record before or during the grand jury process is a completely different question. And right now, only time will answer the second one. Let's turn to the piece of this case that sounds the most like science fiction, but is actually just physics. Ben Crump, the family's attorney, revealed that his team is working with people whose entire job is understanding how bodies move through water. Crump said the team is currently working with oceanic engineering experts to examine how and why Wells's body was found in the same location where he was last seen. Let that sit for a second. If someone goes missing in open water and drifts, currents and tides are supposed to move a body over time. That's what water does. The family's engineering team is asking a very specific, very testable question. Does the physical location where Nolan's body surfaced match what you'd expect from drift, current, and tide patterns in that stretch of water? Or does it look like the body stayed roughly where it was last seen in a way ocean physics doesn't easily explain? That's not an emotional question. That's a mathematical one. It has an answer. Oceanic engineers can model currents. They can model drift. They can run the numbers. And whatever those numbers say, they will either support the official account of what happened after Wells was last seen, or they will directly contradict it. Does this look like an accident the water explains, or a location the water can't explain? We don't know yet. But notice this. That's now a live, ongoing forensic thread sitting right alongside the phone, right alongside the audio, right alongside the autopsy. 4 separate evidentiary threads running at the same time in the same case. That is not normal for a case investigators are calling accidental until proven otherwise. Now, here's a detail that reframes something from earlier in this timeline: the actual departure from the island. The friend's account has always been that they left around 4:30 in the afternoon without Nolan because he wanted to stay behind. According to reporting on the case, the group stated they departed Horn Island around 4:30 p.m. on July 4th. And GPS data backs up that departure time specifically. GPS data, reviewed by the Jackson County, Mississippi investigation, show the boat left Horn Island around 4:31 p.m. and returned to the group's original departure point later that evening. So the boat's location data lines up with the friend's story. That's worth stating plainly, because fairness matters here. The official timeline on this specific point is corroborated by hard data, not just testimony. But here's the friction. However, witnesses told police they spotted Wells on the island as late as 6 p.m., hours after his friends claimed to have left. Hold both of those facts at once. GPS says the boat left at 4:31. Separate witnesses say they saw Nolan on the island at 6 p.m. Those two things are not automatically contradictory. People can be on an island without being with the group that left by boat. And other boats, other people could have been present. But it does mean the story of the group left and Nolan simply wasn't with them needs an explanation for who Nolan actually was with for the roughly 90 minutes after his friend's boat departed. That's not an accusation. That's an unanswered gap in a timeline that otherwise checks out. And it connects to something the friends have said consistently and that the family's team is treating as significant. Wells's friends told authorities, as reported by TMZ, they urged him to board the boat with them, but he chose to stay behind on the island with a girl. There's a specific person in that account. Reporting has referred to her as the mystery girl in this case. Someone investigators have reportedly since identified according to coverage from News Nation. If she was there until at least 6 p.m., her account of those final hours may end up being more important than anyone else's in this entire investigation. What she saw or didn't see sits inside a window that right now nobody outside the investigation has publicly reconciled. Now, let's zoom out, because this is the moment in the story where I bring in outside expertise, someone with a track record of assessing exactly this kind of case. An expert with federal investigative experience who has reviewed this case's public evidence has offered an assessment. According to News Nation's reporting, this former federal agent says a review of surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and the area's riptide conditions point toward a tragic accident rather than foul play. I want you to actually hear the weight of that sentence. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, riptide conditions. 4 independent categories of evidence reviewed by someone whose job used to be assessing exactly this kind of evidence. And the read right now leans toward accident. That matters. That has to be said plainly. Because caveat discipline cuts both ways. It's not fair to only report the details that make this look sinister and ignore the ones that point toward tragedy. But even that same reporting includes a note of caution from someone close to the family, someone who has lived through the slow drip of information in this case. In her words, reflecting on how much is still unknown, I doubt if this what we know will come back with the truth, a warning that more details could still emerge. So, you have an outside expert reading the physical evidence, leaning toward accident, and you have someone inside this case watching the process unfold in real time, saying she doubts what's publicly known is the full picture. Both of those things can be true at once. An assessment based on what's public, and a suspicion that what's public still isn't everything. That tension between the evidence that's been reviewed and the evidence that hasn't been released yet is the entire emotional center of this case right now. Now, remember Ben Crump comparing this case to others. I want to be exact about what he said, and just as exact about what he didn't say. At a conference appearance, Crump stood alongside relatives of two other young men. He was joined by relatives of Tyler Smith and Daniel Irving, two black 18-year-olds who died in recent months, in circumstances Crump described as very similar to Wells's final hours. To be fair to the facts here, those are two separate cases with their own separate evidence, their own separate jurisdictions, their own separate timelines. This is not the same case. Crump is drawing a pattern across three specific families, not asserting these are legally connected incidents. But listen to what actually happened in one of those other cases, because it shows you what accountability can look like when evidence contradicts an initial account. Earlier this month in the Irving case, two friends were charged with evidence tampering because they had failed to report the incident and later discarded items belonging to Daniel, according to a Dallas police spokesperson. Charged, not accused online, charged formally by police for a documented action, failing to report, and discarding items. That's what a completed investigation into after-the-act conduct can produce when the evidence supports it. Trump's point in bringing these families together wasn't, these cases are identical, and was something more specific, 3 18-year-old black boys all within 3 months. Trump said, "We want answers." To be fair to the other side of the conversation as well, relatives in those other cases have said their concerns about the investigations had not been taken seriously by local law enforcement. That's their characterization. It hasn't been independently adjudicated in this script, and it shouldn't be treated as fact, but it is the stated grievance driving why these families are standing together in the first place. So, separate the questions one more time. Whether these three cases share evidentiary overlap is one question, and right now they don't appear to. Whether they share something else, a pattern of families feeling unheard in the early weeks of an investigation involving a young black man's death, is a different question entirely. And that second question is the one Trump is actually asking the public to sit with. Now, one more thread because it's new, and it's strange, and it deserves to be named plainly without overreaching. While all of this has been unfolding, a peripheral but documented event occurred. Authorities announced the arrest of a California man accused of making online threats against Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole, whose family has been connected to the broader investigation. I want to be careful here. An arrest for making threats against a judge tied to this case is a real charged, documented event. It is not evidence about how Nolan Wells died. It's evidence about the temperature this case has reached online and about how far outside the actual investigation the public reaction has traveled. That arrest doesn't tell us anything about the phone, the audio, or the autopsy, but it tells you something about the environment this investigation is happening inside of. And it's part of why the DA's office has been so insistent about controlling what gets released and when. So, where does all of this actually leave us legally, right now today? Let's be precise, because precision is the only thing that respects this family. The state autopsy complete, not public, headed to a grand jury. The independent autopsy complete. Its conclusion is that cause and manner of death remain undetermined, pending investigation, with one unresolved flag and one unresolved gap involving the throat. The phone subject to an agreed joint download between the Sheriff's Department and the family's independent experts. Still no public result. The subpoenas filed against 6 platforms seeking metadata the family says could confirm or rule out tampering. The audio authenticity actively disputed between at least 2 circulating versions, with a forensic expert publicly stating they don't share a digital fingerprint. The oceanic modeling ongoing with results not yet released. No one has been charged, not with causing Nolan Wells' death, not with tampering, not with anything related directly to how he died as of this recording. What has happened is an arrest, in a completely separate matter, for threats made against a judge connected to the case. What's left is the grand jury, the body that will ultimately decide based on everything above whether Jackson County believes a crime occurred here at all. The DA's office has been consistent on why the public hasn't seen more. In her own recorded statement, DA Mrath said it directly. Our restraint in communicating facts and evidence is not an effort to keep the truth from the public. It is an effort to protect the integrity of this investigation and the grand jury proceeding. That's the institution's position stated on the record, not paraphrased. And here's the family's position, stated just as plainly through their attorney, after a meeting with that same DA. Trump said the DA told them directly, she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information and finished their investigation. Both sides on the record describing the same process. That's worth noting, because it means procedurally at least, there isn't currently a documented dispute about what happens next. The dispute is entirely about what happened before and whether every piece of it has been honestly accounted for. What does the family actually want in their own words out of all of this? Not a predetermined verdict. Listen to how Trump framed it, standing next to two other grieving families. We're not trying to cast dispersions on anybody. We want the truth. If it was your child, you'd want the same thing. Weigh now. That's the ask, not a conviction. The truth, whatever it turns out to be. And the community around this case has responded with more than words. A reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction has grown to $125,000, with contributions from several public figures, including Tyler Perry, Colin Kaepernick, and Al Sharpton. $125,000 not from the state, from private citizens and public figures who decided this case needed more attention paid to it than it was getting. And to be fair to the other side of this story one more time, because fairness has to survive all the way to the end, Wells's friends have also put up their own reward. Wells's friends, like the family of Warren Hudson, have offered a reward of $50,000 for information on Nolan's death, and have also threatened legal action against content creators who continue pushing the narrative that his friends were responsible. Notice this. The friends aren't standing still either. They've put their own money forward, and they've drawn a legal line against being tried permanently in public comment sections before any grand jury has even convened. That's the complicated human unresolved shape of this case right now today. A mother comparing two apps on a dead son's phone. A digital forensics expert unable to confirm which version of an audio recording is real. A pathologist asking for a body part that wasn't there. An oceanic engineer running the math on where a current should have carried a body and didn't. And a grand jury somewhere ahead that will eventually have to weigh all four of those threads at once. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He went to Horn Island on the 4th of July with people he called his friends, for a holiday that was supposed to end with everyone going home. Ben Crump described what national attention on this case has actually produced in practical terms: pressure resources, oceanic experts, subpoenas, audio engineers, all of it aimed at one outcome in the family's own words: the truth. So, here's the question we started with, and I'm not going to answer it for you because nobody official has answered it yet either. If the phone data was clean, why has it taken this long to show anyone? If the audio is what people think it is, why can't two experts agree on which version is even real? And if this was simply a tragic accident, on a stretch of water known for dangerous currents, why does every single piece of evidence in this case keep requiring a second independent expert just to be trusted at all? That's not a question this video can answer. That's a question a grand jury in Jackson County, Mississippi is going to have to sit with. We'll be here when they do. If you want to know the moment that grand jury convenes, the moment the autopsy findings become public, the moment the phone data finally gets a result, subscribe, because this channel exists specifically to follow this case past the headlines all the way to the document. And before you go, I want to know what you think actually matters most here. The missing throat, the mismatched audio fingerprint, the 90-minute gap between the boat leaving and the last sighting on the island? Put it in the comments. We'll keep following this until there are real answers.